In 1512, Niccolò Machiavelli was arrested, tortured, and exiled from Florence. His crime wasn't theft or treason, it was knowing too much about how power actually works. For 14 years, he'd served as a diplomatic secretary, watching Europe's most ruthless operators, Cesare Borgia, Pope Julius II, King Louis XII, Emperor Maximilian, destroy each other while claiming divine right and moral superiority. He watched virtuous republics collapse. He watched brutal tyrants build empires. And he noticed something no one was saying out loud. The men who survived weren't the most righteous. They were the ones who understood that political reality operates on principles that have nothing to do with what people claim to believe. So Machiavelli committed the unforgivable sin. He wrote it down. The Prince wasn't a celebration of cruelty. It was a field manual, a dissection of how states are actually built, held, and lost when survival isn't guaranteed and violence is always an option. He stripped away the theological language, the appeals to virtue, the comforting myths about justice, and described the mechanical architecture underneath. What he revealed was this: human systems operate according to forces that don't require your consent. Whether you're navigating a Renaissance court or a modern corporation, whether you're managing a military campaign or a hostile board meeting, the same structural laws apply. These aren't moral laws. They're physical laws of social systems. Gravity doesn't care if you believe in it. Neither do these. Machiavelli was hated for 5 centuries because he made explicit what rulers had always practiced in private, that power is a craft with principles, not a virtue rewarded by providence. He taught that if you want to control outcomes, you need to understand the forces shaping those outcomes. And most of those forces are brutal, amoral, and indifferent to your intentions. Here's what makes this relevant to your life right now. Every time you watch incompetence get promoted, every time you see someone's career destroyed by a rumor while the rumor spreader thrives, every time you lose because you assumed fairness was structural rather than aspirational, you're encountering the same dynamics Machiavelli documented in 1513. You're living in his laboratory. You just didn't have the language. The 12 laws that follow aren't from self-help books or modern reinterpretations. They're extracted directly from Machiavelli's texts. The Prince, Discourses on Livy, the Art of War. And they explain why certain people consistently shape reality, while others remain perpetually subject to it. This isn't about becoming evil, it's about becoming structurally literate in systems that are already operating on you. Let's begin. Law 1. It is better to be feared than loved. If you cannot be both, love is voluntary and conditional. People withdraw it when circumstances shift, when better options appear, or when their interests diverge from yours. Fear is structural. It persists independent of affection because it's rooted in consequence, not sentiment. Machiavelli observed that leaders who relied on being loved were abandoned the moment their fortunes declined. Leaders who were feared retained compliance even during catastrophe because the cost of betrayal remained constant. Cesare Borgia conquered the Romagna through extreme violence, then installed Ramiro de Orco as governor to pacify the region through brutal enforcement. Once order was established, Cesare had Ramiro executed in the town square and blamed him for the cruelty. The people loved Cesare for delivering justice, while simultaneously fearing what he was capable of. He engineered both But when he had to choose, he chose fear. It kept the state intact when his father, Pope Alexander VI, died and his political support collapsed. Love would have evaporated. Fear lingered. You manage a team. You want to be liked, so you avoid difficult conversations. Performance deteriorates. Deadlines slip. When you finally enforce standards, you're resented because you've established no credible consequence structure. If instead you'd set clear boundaries early and enforce them consistently, people might not like you, but they'd respect the structure. Respect is more stable than affection. A team that fears disappointing you will outlast a team that simply likes you. Establish consequences early and enforce them without apology. Don't lead through charisma. Lead through reliability of response. When someone violates a boundary, the consequence must be immediate and proportional. You're not cultivating fear of your personality. You're cultivating fear of predictable outcomes. That's not cruelty. It's architecture. Lead through love alone and you're hostage to moods, politics, and shifting loyalties. Lead through fear, structured consequence, and you retain compliance when circumstances turn hostile. The former collapses under pressure, the latter endures it. Law 2. The ends justify the means when the state's survival is at stake. Machiavelli argued that in politics, actions are judged by outcomes, not intentions. A leader who preserves stability through harsh measures is remembered as effective. A leader who loses the state through moral purity is remembered as weak or not remembered at all. This isn't license for arbitrary cruelty. It's recognition that in systems where survival is contested, the moral luxury of clean hands is a privilege granted only to those who never held real responsibility. When Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon in 49 BCE, he committed treason against the Roman Republic. He destroyed the constitutional order he'd sworn to uphold. But he did it because the Senate was maneuvering to destroy him, and if he'd waited for a legal resolution, he'd have been prosecuted, exiled, or killed. He chose illegal action to preserve his position, and in doing so, became the foundation of the Roman Empire. History doesn't remember him as a traitor. It remembers him as Caesar. The means were illegal. The outcome reshaped civilization. Your company is failing. You have two choices. Follow proper HR protocol for layoffs, which will take 6 months and bankrupt the company, or make unilateral cuts immediately, which violates process but saves the business. If you follow process and the company dies, you're remembered as the person who couldn't make hard decisions. If you cut fast and the company survives, you're remembered as the leader who saved it. The means were harsh. The outcome was survival. Machiavelli's point: only the outcome will be remembered. When stakes are existential, optimize for the outcome, not the optics of the process. This doesn't mean anything goes. It means you weigh the cost of moral purity against the cost of failure. If the entity you're responsible for, team, project, organization, will collapse without decisive action, then decisive action is the moral choice, even if the method is imperfect. Prioritize process over survival, and you lose the entity you are trying to protect. Prioritize survival, and you may face criticism, but you'll still exist to be criticized. The first is noble extinction. The second is uncomfortable continuity. Law 3. Fortuna favors the bold and adaptive. Passivity is structural suicide. Machiavelli personified fortuna, as a violent river. When it floods, It destroys everything in its path. But when times are calm, wise leaders build dams, levees, and channels. Fortune rewards those who act before crisis forces action. Passivity isn't neutrality. It's surrender to circumstance. Boldness isn't recklessness. It's refusing to let external forces determine your positioning. In 1494, Charles VIII of France invaded Italy with a modern army. Italian city-states had spent decades in comfortable equilibrium, relying on diplomacy and mercenary forces. They weren't prepared for total war. Within months, Charles marched from Milan to Naples almost unopposed. The Italian states collapsed, not because they were weak, but because they'd been passive. They waited for threats to materialize before responding. Machiavelli watched this happen and concluded, "Fortune destroys those who wait for her permission. Your industry is being disrupted. You see the signs, new competitors, shifting customer behavior, emerging technology. You have two options: wait for leadership to issue a strategy, or start repositioning yourself immediately. If you wait, you're subject to whatever decisions get made without your input. If you act, build new skills, establish relationships in the emerging space, position yourself as an early adopter. You're in the room when decisions are made." Passivity guarantees you're a subject of change. Action gives you a chance to be an architect of it. When you see structural shifts beginning, act before consensus forms. Start the project before you have permission. Build the skill before it's listed as a requirement. Establish the relationship before you need the favor. Machiavelli's lesson: fortune rewards those who move while others deliberate. Wait for perfect conditions and you'll be swept away when conditions shift. Act during uncertainty and you position yourself to exploit the chaos. The former is how careers end. The latter is how careers accelerate. Law 4. Appear virtuous, but be ruthless when necessary. Machiavelli distinguished between being virtuous and appearing virtuous. A leader who is genuinely virtuous in all circumstances will be destroyed by those who aren't. But a leader who appears virtuous while reserving the capacity for ruthlessness can navigate both moral expectations and existential threats. This isn't hypocrisy, it's operational intelligence. Reputation is a tool. Virtue is a tactic. Survival is the strategy. Pope Julius II was called the warrior pope because he personally led armies into battle. He was brutal, ambitious, and politically savage. But he was also the pope, the ultimate symbol of Christian virtue. He used his religious authority to legitimize his military campaigns, presenting conquest as divine mission. His enemies couldn't attack him without attacking the church. His appearance of virtue, papal authority, made his ruthlessness, military aggression, politically untouchable. He died in power, having expanded the papal states more than any pope in a century. You're negotiating a major contract. Publicly, you emphasize partnership, shared values, long-term collaboration. Privately, you've identified their leverage points and structured the deal to lock them into terms that favor you. If you'd been openly ruthless, they'd have walked. If you'd been genuinely naive, they'd have exploited you. Instead, you appeared collaborative while being strategically ruthless. You got the deal. They think it was mutual benefit. That's not deception. It's competent negotiation. Cultivate a public reputation for fairness, collaboration, and integrity. Maintain it consistently. But when someone violates the implicit contract, when they exploit your trust, undermine your position, or threaten your interests. Respond with immediate, disproportionate force. The contrast between your normal behavior and your response to betrayal creates a deterrent. People learn. Cooperating with you is rewarding. Betraying you is catastrophic. Be genuinely virtuous in all situations, and you'll be exploited by those who aren't. Appear virtuous while reserving ruthlessness, and you create asymmetric safety. Cooperation is incentivized. Betrayal is punished. The first is martyrdom. The second is sustainable power. Law 5. Cruelty. Used well is swift, decisive, and finite. Machiavelli distinguished between cruelty used well and cruelty used badly. Cruelty used well is inflicted all at once, serves a clear strategic purpose, and then stops, allowing people to recover and stabilize. Cruelty used badly is prolonged, arbitrary, and creates permanent insecurity. The first establishes order. The second generates perpetual resistance. Most leaders fail not because they're too cruel, but because they're cruel inefficiently, dragging out consequences, creating ongoing fear without resolution. When Cesare Borgia took Romagna, he needed to break the power of local warlords quickly. He invited them to a peace negotiation, then had them all arrested and executed in a single night at Senigallia. It was brutal, but it was decisive. Within weeks, the region stabilized because the threat was eliminated entirely, not drawn out over months. Machiavelli praised this specifically. Cesare didn't torture them publicly or create ongoing spectacles of violence. He removed the obstacle completely and then governed normally. The cruelty was surgical, not sadistic. You need to fire underperformers. You have two options. Draw it out over 6 months with performance improvement plans, warnings, and escalating tension, or make the decision immediately, execute it cleanly, and move forward. The first option seems humane, but creates ongoing demoralization for the entire team. Everyone knows it's coming. Productivity collapses. The second option is harsh but finite. The team experiences shock, then relief that the ambiguity is over. Machiavelli's lesson: prolonged cruelty is worse than decisive cruelty. When harsh action is necessary, compress it into the shortest possible time frame. Make the decision, execute it completely, then immediately return to normal operations. Don't revisit it. Don't justify it repeatedly. Don't create a culture of ongoing punishment. The goal isn't to make people suffer. It's to remove an obstacle and restore stability. Drag out cruelty, and you create perpetual insecurity, which erodes loyalty and productivity. Execute it decisively, and you create a brief shock followed by relief and renewed stability. The first destroys morale. The second establishes boundaries. Law 6. Never remain neutral in conflicts between great powers. Machiavelli observed that neutrality in major conflicts is always punished. The winner resents that you didn't support them. The loser blames you for not intervening. Neutrality looks like strategic caution, but functions as structural cowardice. It signals that you're willing to let others determine outcomes and then live with whatever they decide. That makes you irrelevant. The powerful don't respect neutrality. They interpret it as weakness. When France and Spain fought for control of Italy in the early 1500s, several Italian city-states tried to remain neutral, hoping to avoid becoming battlegrounds. Machiavelli watched as those neutral states were either conquered by the winner, who saw them as safe to absorb, or punished by the loser, who blamed them for not providing support. Florence tried neutrality and was sacked. Milan tried neutrality and was occupied. The states that chose sides, even if they chose the losing side, at least built alliances and negotiating leverage. Neutrality built nothing. Two executives in your company are in open conflict. You try to stay neutral, thinking it's professional. When one wins, they remember that you didn't support them. You're excluded from key decisions. Your neutrality didn't protect you. It marked you as someone without strategic conviction. If you'd picked a side, you'd either have a powerful ally or a clear understanding of where you stand. Instead, you have neither. When major conflicts emerge in your environment, assess which side aligns with your long-term interests and commit. Don't hedge publicly. Don't try to maintain relationships with both sides. Choose, commit, and accept the consequences. Machiavelli's point. Having enemies is less dangerous than having no allies. Stay neutral, and you're irrelevant to whoever wins. Pick a side, and you're either rewarded for loyalty or at least treated as an honest adversary. The first is strategic invisibility. The second is positional clarity. Why Law 7, build your own forces, mercenaries and auxiliaries are structurally unreliable. Machiavelli spent years watching Italian states rely on hired mercenaries, condottieri, who had no loyalty to the states employing them. Mercenaries fight for money, not mission. When conditions shift, when payment delays, when risk increases, when better offers appear, they abandon you. Auxiliaries, borrowed forces from allies, are even worse. They're loyal to someone else's interests, and if they win, you're indebted to a foreign power. True power requires building forces that are loyal to you specifically, not to whoever pays more. In 1494, when Charles VIII invaded Italy, the Italian city-states discovered their mercenary armies were worthless. The mercenaries negotiated terms with the French rather than fight. Some switched sides entirely. Florence, relying on hired forces, collapsed immediately. Machiavelli concluded that no state could survive long-term without citizen armies, forces with a direct stake in the state's survival. Rome built an empire with citizen soldiers. Renaissance Italy collapsed with mercenaries. You're building a startup. You could hire contractors for every critical function, cheaper, flexible, no long-term commitment. But contractors are mercenaries. They have no equity stake. When a better project appears, they leave. When problems arise, they're not incentivized to solve them. If instead you hire a small core team with equity and deep commitment, you've built a loyal force. They won't abandon you during crisis because their success is structurally tied to yours. Invest in building loyalty among people whose success is directly tied to your success. This means equity, shared risk, and long-term alignment, not just transactional payments. Whether it's employees, partners, or advisors, prioritize structural loyalty over convenience. Mercenaries are cheaper in the short term. Loyal forces are cheaper in the long term because they don't defect during crises. Rely on mercenaries, people loyal only to payment, and you're vulnerable the moment better offers appear. Build loyal forces, and you create resilience during adversity. The first is efficiency during calm. The second is survival during chaos. Law 8. Secure your state before expanding. Consolidation precedes conquest. Expansion without consolidation is structural overreach. Every new territory, relationship, or responsibility creates new vulnerabilities. If your core position isn't secure, if your base of power has internal weaknesses, unresolved threats, or unstable foundations, then expansion accelerates collapse rather than growth. Machiavelli observed that leaders who conquered rapidly without securing what they'd already taken lost everything when one piece failed. Stability compounds. Instability metastasizes. Alexander the Great conquered the largest empire in ancient history, but he didn't consolidate it. He kept moving, kept conquering, kept expanding. And when he died at 32, his empire immediately fragmented into warring successor states. Within 20 years, it had splintered completely. Contrast this with Augustus, who inherited a chaotic Roman Republic, spent decades consolidating power, and built an empire that lasted 5 centuries. Augustus secured Rome before expanding it. Alexander expanded without securing. One built a legacy. The other built a collapse. You get promoted to manage a larger team. You immediately start launching new initiatives to prove yourself. But your existing team has unresolved conflicts, unclear processes, and declining morale. Within 6 months, both the old problems and the new initiatives are failing. If you'd spent the first 90 days securing your base, resolving conflicts, clarifying roles, stabilizing output, then expansion would have been sustainable. Instead, you built on a cracked foundation. Before taking on new responsibilities, new projects, or new relationships, audit your current position. Are there unresolved vulnerabilities, internal conflicts, structural weaknesses? If yes, fix them before expanding. Machiavelli's rule, a weak core guarantees that expansion becomes the mechanism of your collapse. Expand without consolidation, and every new success creates new fragility. Secure your base first, and expansion becomes force multiplication rather than overextension. The first is impressive until it collapses. The second is sustainable. Law 9. Adapt to circumstances, but never abandon your nature. Machiavelli argued that fortune is constantly shifting and leaders must adapt their tactics to changing conditions. But he also observed that people can't fundamentally change their nature. A cautious leader can't suddenly become bold. An aggressive leader can't suddenly become patient. The key is knowing your nature and adapting tactics without violating your fundamental temperament. Leaders fail when they try to be someone they're not, or when they're so rigid they can't adjust to new realities. Pope Julius II was aggressive and impulsive by nature. He succeeded because the political moment rewarded aggression. His enemies were divided. His timing was good. Fortune favored boldness. But Machiavelli noted that if Julius had lived longer and circumstances shifted to require patience and diplomacy, he would have failed. He couldn't adapt his nature. Contrast this with Fabius Maximus, the Roman general who defeated Hannibal through relentless caution and delay. His nature, patience, matched his circumstances, asymmetric warfare against a superior force. When circumstances shifted, Rome needed different leadership. Fabius understood this and stepped aside. You're analytical and deliberate by nature. Your company enters a crisis that requires rapid, instinctive decision-making. If you try to force yourself into a leadership style that contradicts your nature, you'll fail. Not because you're incompetent, but because you're operating outside your optimal range. Better option: recognize the mismatch, bring in someone whose nature fits the moment, and position yourself for the phase where deliberate analysis matters again. Adaptation isn't becoming someone else. It's recognizing when circumstances favor your nature and when they don't. Know your nature. Are you bold or cautious, patient or aggressive, strategic or tactical? Don't fight it. Optimize for environments where your nature is an advantage. When circumstances shift against your nature, either adapt your tactics within your range. A cautious person can be decisive about caution, or recognize that someone else is better suited for this moment. Ignore your nature, and you'll exhaust yourself trying to be someone you're not. Adapt tactics while honoring your nature, and you maximize effectiveness while maintaining psychological sustainability. The first is performative. The second is strategic. Law 10. Injuries must be inflicted all at once. Benefits should be dispensed gradually. Humans adapt to pain if it's delivered in a single shock, but become demoralized if pain is prolonged. Conversely, humans stop appreciating benefits if they arrive all at once, but remain grateful if benefits are distributed over time. Machiavelli observed that leaders who consolidated all their harsh measures into a single moment and then never returned to them were forgiven. Leaders who inflicted ongoing small cruelties were resented indefinitely. The same logic applies to rewards. A single large gift is quickly forgotten. Many small gifts create sustained loyalty. When Cesare Borgia conquered new territories, he would execute all opposition, confiscate all enemy property, and restructure all governance in a single brutal month. Then he'd immediately begin distributing benefits, lowered taxes, improved infrastructure, fair legal systems, slowly, one improvement at a time. People forgot the initial shock and remembered the ongoing improvements. He engineered gratitude by controlling the pacing of pain versus benefit. You take over a failing department. You need to fire 3 people, cut 2 programs, and restructure reporting lines. If you spread these over 6 months, morale collapses. Everyone lives in ongoing anxiety. If you execute all of it in 1 week, there's shock, then relief that the restructuring is over. Then you start distributing benefits slowly. Small process improvements, incremental resource increases, visible wins. People remember the gradual improvements more than the one-time shock. When you must inflict pain, layoffs, budget cuts, restructures, compress it into the shortest possible window. Announce it once. Execute it completely. Never revisit it. Then begin distributing benefits gradually. Small wins, incremental improvements, consistent positive momentum. This shapes perception. One bad moment followed by ongoing improvement. Prolonged pain and people never escape resentment. Deliver it all at once and people adapt. Deliver benefits all at once and people forget. Distribute them over time and gratitude compounds. The first is how you lose loyalty. The second is how you build it. Law 11. Enter evil slowly, but exit it never or not at all. Machiavelli warned that half measures in morally ambiguous actions are worse than inaction. If you're going to do something ruthless, eliminate a rival, break a norm, violate an expectation, you must commit completely. Hesitation signals doubt. Doubt invites resistance. Resistance creates prolonged conflict. If you're not willing to fully commit to a harsh action, don't begin it. Starting and then retreating leaves you with the reputational cost, but none of the strategic benefit. When the Roman Senate decided to eliminate Julius Caesar, they did it half-heartedly. They assassinated him, but left his allies Mark Antony and Octavian, alive. They hoped killing Caesar would be enough. It wasn't. His allies rallied, ignited a civil war, and within 15 years had destroyed the Republic entirely. If the Senate was going to commit political murder, they needed to eliminate the entire network. Half commitment gave them the moral cost of assassination without the strategic benefit of removing the threat. They entered evil slowly and exited it too early. It destroyed them. You decide to push out a toxic team member, you start by reducing their responsibilities, hoping they'll leave voluntarily. They don't. They entrench. They build alliances. They frame you as the aggressor. Now you're in a prolonged conflict with reputational damage and no resolution. If you'd committed fully, documented performance issues, and terminated cleanly, it would have been over in a week. Instead, you entered evil slowly and are now stuck in it. When you decide a ruthless action is necessary, plan it completely, execute it decisively, and don't revisit it. Half measures create prolonged conflicts. Full commitment creates finite resolution. Machiavelli's lesson: if you're not willing to go all the way, don't start. Partial ruthlessness is just prolonged weakness. Commit half-heartedly, and you get all the reputational cost with none of the strategic benefit. Commit fully, and you get a brief reputational hit, followed by resolution. The first is ongoing damage. The second is finite cost. Law 12. The lion and the fox. Force without cunning is vulnerable. Cunning without force is impotent. Machiavelli argued that effective leaders must embody two archetypes: the lion, force, courage, direct power, and the fox, cunning, deception, strategic, misdirection. The lion can defeat wolves but falls into traps. The fox can avoid traps but can't fight wolves. You need both. Leaders who rely only on force become predictable and are outmaneuvered. Leaders who rely only on cunning lack the capacity to enforce their will when manipulation fails. Power requires the integration of both. Ferdinand of Aragon, Isabella's husband, co-ruler of Spain, was Machiavelli's model of this integration. Ferdinand was ruthless in war, the lion. He completed the Reconquista, expelled the Moors, and built Spain into a superpower. But he was equally skilled in deception, the fox. He manipulated alliances, broke treaties when advantageous, and used religion as political cover. He would sign peace agreements while secretly preparing for war. He'd appear pious while conducting brutal realpolitik. He died having unified Spain and positioned it as Europe's dominant power because he refused to be limited to one mode of operation. You're negotiating a partnership. If you're only the fox, clever, evasive, always maneuvering, your counterpart will eventually realize you have no real leverage and walk away. If you're only the lion, direct, forceful, unwilling to compromise, you'll create unnecessary conflict and lose deals you could have won through subtlety. Effective negotiation requires both the capacity to enforce terms, lion, and the skill to make enforcement unnecessary through strategic positioning, fox. Cultivate both capacities. Build real power, resources, relationships, skills that give you leverage independent of persuasion. That's the lion. Then develop strategic cunning, the ability to position, frame, and maneuver so you rarely need to use force. That's the fox. Most people default to one. Machiavelli's point: defaulting to one makes you structurally incomplete. Be only the lion and you're powerful, but predictable. Be only the fox and you're clever, but impotent. Integrate both, and you become the worst kind of opponent, someone who can outmaneuver you and overpower you. The first two are manageable. The third is dominant. Here's the part that makes people uncomfortable. Machiavelli wasn't teaching tyranny. He was teaching reality without the comforting mythology. You've been raised on narratives that say good people win, hard work is rewarded, and justice prevails. Those narratives serve a social function. They make hierarchies tolerable for the majority. But they're not descriptions of how power actually works. They're stories we tell to make subordination feel voluntary. Machiavelli committed the great offense. He described the mechanics. He said, in effect, if you want to build something, hold something, or protect something in a world where other people also want to build, hold, and protect things, and some of those people are willing to use force, deception, and ruthlessness, then you need to understand the principles they're operating under. Because whether you engage with those principles or not, they're engaging with you. This creates a psychological crisis for most people, because admitting that these laws exist feels like endorsing them. It's not. Recognizing gravity doesn't mean you support people falling. It means you understand why they do. The question isn't whether these laws are fair, or whether you like them, or whether they align with your values. The question is, are they accurate? When someone less competent gets promoted because they manage perception better, that's law 4 in action, appear virtuous. When a company collapses because the founder kept expanding without fixing internal chaos, that's law 8, secure before expanding. When a leader loses control because they prolong difficult decisions instead of executing them decisively, that's law 5. Cruelty, used well, is finite. These patterns repeat because they're structural, not moral. You've already been navigating these laws. You just didn't have the language. And without language, you can't strategize. You can only react. Here's the inner work. You have to separate competence from morality. Machiavelli isn't telling you to be cruel. He's telling you that if cruelty is necessary, there's an efficient way and an inefficient way to deploy it. And the inefficient way causes more suffering while achieving less. That's not an endorsement of cruelty. It's an engineering specification. The same logic applies to every law here. He's not saying be ruthless for its own sake. He's saying if you're going to act ruthlessly, understand the mechanics so you don't create unnecessary damage. He's not saying deceive everyone always. He's saying understand when appearance and reality must diverge to achieve outcomes that require both legitimacy and force. The discomfort you feel isn't moral outrage. It's cognitive dissonance between the stories you were told and the patterns you've observed. You've seen these laws in action your entire life. You just weren't allowed to name them. Now you can. And here's what changes when you do. You stop blaming yourself for outcomes that were structural. You stop assuming good intentions will protect you. You stop expecting systems to reward fairness when they're actually rewarding positional literacy. You start seeing the architecture underneath the theater, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's not corruption. That's strategic literacy. You now have the framework. Here's how to operationalize it. Step 1. Conduct a Machiavellian audit, 7 days. For the next week, observe your environment through these 12 laws. Don't act, just observe. Where are people being punished for neutrality? Law 6. Who's relying on mercenaries? contractors, external dependencies, instead of building loyal forces. Law 7. Who's expanding before consolidating? Law 8. Where is someone prolonging cruelty instead of executing it decisively? Law 5. Write this down. You're building diagnostic literacy. Most people never see these patterns because they're looking for individual psychology. He's insecure, she's ambitious, instead of structural mechanics. Machiavelli forces you to see systems, not just personalities. Step 2. Identify your structural vulnerability. 1 law. Review the 12 laws and identify which one most directly explains your current weakness. For examples, if you're being sidelined, you might be violating Law 6, remaining neutral in conflicts. If your team is unreliable, you might be violating Law 7, relying on mercenaries instead of loyal forces. If you're overwhelmed, you might be violating Law 8, expanding before consolidating. Pick one law. Focus there. Don't try to implement all 12 simultaneously. That's not Machiavellian. It's performative. Machiavelli was ruthlessly focused. So should you be. Step 3. Run a 30-day tactical experiment. Implement one specific behavior derived from your chosen law. If you're working on Law 1, better to be feared than loved. Identify one boundary you've failed to enforce. Announce the boundary clearly. The next time someone violates it, respond immediately with proportional consequence. Track. Does behavior change? If you're working on Law 7, build your own forces. Identify one critical dependency on someone who isn't structurally loyal to you. Begin building an alternative. Track. Does your resilience increase if you're working on Law 12, lion and fox? Identify where you're defaulting only to force or only to cunning. Practice the opposite. Track. Do your outcomes improve? This isn't theory. It's field research in your own environment. Step 4. Document outcomes, not intentions. Machiavelli didn't care about your intentions. He cared about outcomes. At the end of 30 days, ask, did the behavior shift reality? Did people respond differently? Did your position strengthen? If yes, compound it. Layer in a second law. If no, diagnose why. Did you misread the environment? Did you execute poorly? Or is the law inapplicable in this specific context? Machiavelli wasn't dogmatic. He was empirical. If something doesn't work, adjust. Step 5. Protect your strategic opacity. As you begin applying these laws, some people will notice. They'll ask what changed. They'll want to know your secret. Do not explain your strategy to people who aren't already operating at your target level. This is Law 2 in practice. Guard your intentions. The moment you articulate your Machiavellian framework to someone who doesn't already think this way, you've created a threat. They'll either try to preempt you or they'll moralize at you. Neither helps. If pressed, attribute changes to focusing on outcomes or becoming more decisive. Both are true and non-threatening. Reserve strategic transparency for peers who already understand these dynamics. Everyone else gets operational transparency, what you're doing, but not strategic transparency, why you're doing it. Step 6. Iterate and integrate. After 90 days, you should have tested 2 to 3 laws in real conditions. Now, integrate them. The goal isn't to use Machiavellian tactics. The goal is to internalize Machiavellian literacy so that when you encounter a situation, you instinctively recognize which law applies and respond accordingly. That's not manipulation. That's fluency. Within 6 months, people will describe you differently. They'll use words like strategic, effective, someone who gets things done. They won't know why. You will. Let me be precise about something. Machiavelli's laws are amoral. They work for tyrants and liberators equally. They're structural principles. They don't care whether you're building a surveillance state or a free republic, a predatory corporation or a mission-driven nonprofit. They describe how power consolidates, how it's held, and how it's lost. That means the responsibility for how you use them is entirely yours. History is full of people who mastered Machiavellian principles and built nothing worth having. They accumulated power for its own sake, died alone, and left behind systems that collapsed within a generation. It's also full of people who use these same principles to build enduring institutions, protect vulnerable populations, and create structures that outlive them by centuries. The difference wasn't the principles, it was what they were in service of. Machiavelli himself understood this. He wrote The Prince as a manual for taking and holding power. But he also wrote Discourses on Livy, where he argued that republics, systems that distribute power and accountability, are more stable and ethical than autocracies. He wasn't confused. He was complete. He understood that you need to know how power works before you can decide how it should work. So here's the test. You now understand how these 12 laws operate. You've seen them in historical case studies. You've recognized them in your own environment. You've begun implementing them. The question is, what are you building? Because if your answer is, I'm building my own position, that's fine, but it's hollow. You'll win locally and lose existentially. You'll get the promotion, the title, the recognition, and then realize you've optimized for the wrong variable. If your answer is, I'm building something that matters and I need power to protect it, then you're using these laws correctly. Machiavelli wasn't amoral because he was nihilistic. He was amoral because he believed that good intentions without effective power are just expensive failures. He wanted Florence to survive. He wanted republics to function. He wanted leaders to be effective, not just virtuous. And he knew that the world doesn't reward good people. It rewards competent people who understand how systems work. So, here's the final question. You now have the literacy. You understand the architecture. You've been given the same principles that Cesare Borgia, Ferdinand of Aragon, and Caterina Sforza used to reshape European politics. What are you going to do with it? You can close this video and go back to pretending that fairness is structural, that good work speaks for itself, that the world will reward your intentions, or you can accept that you live in systems that operate according to forces Machiavelli documented 500 years ago, and those forces are still running. The choice isn't whether to engage with power. You're already in a power system. You're already subject to these laws. The choice is whether you're going to remain structurally illiterate while others use these principles on you, or whether you're going to become fluent so you can shape outcomes instead of being shaped by them. Machiavelli didn't write for tyrants. He wrote for people who wanted to understand how tyrants think. Because once you understand the architecture of power, you stop being its victim. You become its architect. Now go build something worth defending